Hello and welcome to the historynetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, just pop along to patreon.com/the History Network. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The historynetwork.org podcast, Season 32, Episode 7, The Northwest Indian War, Part 2. This episode was written by Christopher Waters, who is an armchair historian from New York City. He works full-time for the United States federal government and continues his education online part-time. He has a master's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in terrorism studies from John Jay College, a master's degree in military history with a concentration in American military history from American Military University, AMU, and is currently working on his Masters in American History, also from AMU. He grew up listening and learning history from his World War II veteran grandfathers and his father, who let him watch all the classic history war movies on TV. While his degrees are American history focused, Chris likes to learn about a wide range of world history subjects through listening to history-based podcasts, especially while training for whatever his next marathon is. Historian Thomas Boyd said, "At last the rule of the tomahawk and musket, which for more than 20 years had made the forests, the rivers, and the plains beyond the Alleghenies a torture chamber and a burial ground, had reached its end." The Legion of the United States was America's first attempt to establish a permanent military capable of defending its new borders from hostile Native Americans as a reaction to the defeats of the hastily raised regular and militia units during the Harmar Campaign and St. Clair's defeat. The United States Congress recognized the failures of the previous attempts to subjugate the native population in terms of the size, training, and equipment of the American forces sent into the Ohio Territory. They authorized President George Washington to create a new professional army of around 5,200 men, which was roughly equivalent to a Roman imperial legion. Thus, this new army was dubbed the Legion of the United States. President Washington, after soliciting former Continental Army generals to their interest into leading this force and taking the advice of Secretary of War Henry Knox and former Inspector General of the Army Frederick von Steuben, gave the assignment for its enlistment, equipping, training, and organization to Major General Mad Anthony Wayne. Mad Anthony, as he was nicknamed for his fiery temper and aggressive combat style, was born in Pennsylvania and held various jobs before being elected to the Assembly and helping to raise a militia unit in the early days of the American Revolution. He commanded his unit in the disastrous invasion of Canada, where his leadership and commandability were recognized by Benedict Arnold, and Wayne was promoted to Brigadier General in 1777. Now General Wayne was assigned to the main Continental Army under George Washington and ably commanded the Pennsylvania line at the Battle of Brandywine, where he held off the attacking Hessian force of General Howe's army for several hours before retreating with the rest of the American army. However, his men were surprised by a daring bayonet night attack during the battle, sometimes called Massacre of Paoli, soon thereafter. Demanding a court-martial to clear his tarnished name, he continued to serve at the head of his Pennsylvania troops at the Battle of Germantown, Monmouth, and Stony Point. The Battle of Stony Point was the highlight of his Revolution experience and personal vengeance, where Wayne created a specialized force of light infantry and led them during a similar night-time bayonet assault that was used previously against him. His men overran the defences of the fort and killed or captured the entire British garrison at low cost to themselves. Wayne continued to serve with the army until the end of the war, before retiring back to his home and continuing his involvement in local politics and running various farms and businesses awarded to him for his services in the Revolution. Being recalled to arms by President Washington came at a fortunate time for Anthony Wayne. His businesses and marriage were all failing, and coming back into the service provided a spark of energy and creativity he desperately needed. His ideas for the Legion were based on his Continental Army experience and from the lessons learned from the recent defeats by the Native Americans. The Legion was organised to be one of the first combined arms units in military history. We tend to think of a combined arms battalion as a Cold War or later creation, but each of the sub-legions, basically its regiments, were organised to include 2 battalions of regular infantry for their corps, a unit of light infantry armed with Pennsylvania long rifles, an artillery company, and a troop-mounted light dragoons for scouting and pursuing. Each sub-legion was allocated a different colour scheme for this cap to create a new esprit de corps and rapid unit identification, especially when preparing to operate in the woods of the Northwest Territories. Due to the native marksman habit of targeting officers, Wayne ensured his new officers wore the same uniform as the rest of the soldiers to counter the native attacks. Furthermore, a return to the old Baron von Steuben high standard of drill and discipline was instituted for the new recruits and returning veterans. They were trained to operate in smaller units than the old Continental Army battalions, and this required flexibility to achieve manoeuvrability and local fire superiority. To begin the training, General Wayne moved the Legion to a new location, dubbed Legionville, not far from the town of Pittsburgh, during the winter of 1792, and to maintain the discipline of the men. As the Legion reached its allocated numbers and the training was beginning to have positive effects on the men, Wayne felt it was time to get the men adapted to the Northwest Territories and ordered an advance westward towards the line of forts protecting American settlers in Ohio. As the Legion reached its assigned areas of operations, they set up a series of forts and supply depots to supply the men with everything they needed and to establish local control over the region from native tribesmen. The legionaries gained tactical experience fighting off native raids on their supply convoys and bases. To increase their protection, General Wayne reluctantly took on up to 1,500 Kentucky militiamen, supplementing his legionaries as auxiliaries and mounted infantry, again akin to the warfare of the Imperial Roman legions. One of the major attacks took place at Fort Recovery in the spring of 1794, a legion base built on the site of St. Clair's defeat, when nearly 2,000 native warriors led by Chief Bluejacket and including a young Tecumseh and several British officers attacking as advisors, attacked first a supply convoy and then the fort itself for almost 2 days. The 250-man garrison was lucky that it was behind walls and in blockhouses and contained the long rifle armed light infantry and several cannon, including some recovered from St. Clair's army. Failing to overrun the defences after the ambush, the native warriors attacked off and on over the 2 days before packing up and leaving on the night of the second day. Casualties were most likely about equal, about 100 dead and wounded per side, as the natives regularly carried off their dead and wounded following a battle, making it difficult to determine native losses. However, the result was the Americans held the fort and the field at the end of the battle. General Wayne sent an emergency supply train in case of renewed attacks by the natives and personally led a reinforcement column later on. However, no further attacks were made, and the Legion was able to continue their west and northwards fort-building program. The final battle of the Northwest Indian War came later in the summer of 1794. Having learnt that peace negotiations with the native tribal confederacy had failed, General Wayne ordered the Legion of the United States and the Kentucky militiamen, minus those units detached maintaining garrisons or escorting convoys, to march north towards British-occupied Fort Miami. The natives were prevented from attacking the column on the march as the Americans mirrored the strategy of the Roman legions, wherein they marched all morning and into the early afternoon and then stopped to build a fortified camp that protected the men and supplies. This pattern continued for the entire march. British advisers with the native army encouraged the war chiefs to locate a suitable battlefield where the Americans could be subjected to long-range fire from behind cover and allow for flanking attacks similar to St. Clair's defeat. Blue Jacket and Little Turtle found such a place, located near modern-day Toledo, Ohio. A wooded location centered around a large group of trees that had been knocked over in a recent storm, thus giving the upcoming battle its name, the Battle of Fallen Timbers. On August 19th, General Wayne's scouts soon discovered the native positions and reported back to the general at his latest supply base. Thinking that the Americans would follow a similar pattern from the earlier campaigns, wherein they stayed within their camp for several days planning for a battle, many of the natives relaxed their guard, thinking they had time to prepare themselves. An early morning rain shower the next day, on August 20th, further relaxed the native warriors, as the Americans hated fighting in the mud. However, during this campaign, the native confederacy was opposed by a talented commander made famous for his daring attacks, and by the Legion, a highly trained, equipped and disciplined fighting force. General Wayne formed his men into several columns, with mounted dragoons and artillery in the middle, able to be flexible in their response to any threats. The lead units of militia were ambushed by the native front line and quickly fell back in disorder. However, the Legion companies maintained their order and began to form a line of battle. General Wayne was quick to react to the opening developments and rushed around these various units, forming an extended line and bringing forth his artillery. The native warriors had rushed forward in pursuit of the fleeing Americans, only to run into the Legion's muskets and grape shot of the artillery. Now it was the turn of many of the natives to run away. General ordered his men, as relayed through his aide, William Henry Harrison, to charge after them with their bayonets. The individual tribal chiefs rallied their own warriors to stem the tide, but many were killed or wounded in the Legion attacks. When encountered with heavy resistance to their attacks, the flexibility and small unit leadership allowed for the Legion to flank the native warriors, causing the retreat to continue. After driving the natives out of the wooded area, Legion dragoons were able to take advantage of their speed and height to inflict more casualties on the natives and drive the natives towards Fort Miami. However, fearing potential open conflict with the Americans, the British commander of the fort refused to open the gates for the natives and thus forced the natives to completely flee the area. While a hard-fought engagement, the Battle of Fallen Timbers produced relatively low casualties on both sides. The Americans suffered 33 dead and about 100 wounded, and the native Indians had about 40 killed and an unknown number of wounded. However, it would prove to be a decisive American victory. The Legion raided the area around Fort Miami, destroying native villages and crops and making their strength known to the British. Over the fall and winter of 1794, the Legion continued its push into native lands, driving the natives before them and building forts at key locations. 1795 saw the opening of negotiations for a lasting peace on the frontier. Led by Blue Jacket, who saw Wayne and the Legion as opponents that could not be openly defeated, the Native Tribal Confederacy signed the Treaty of Greenville in August. This treaty established new boundaries for the lands that would remain in native possession and those that the United States would pay for to allow for peaceful settlement of those areas. Centered on the site of St. Clair's defeat, the natives would be confined to the northwest part of Ohio and lands westwards. However, this treaty left a bitter aftertaste in many of the younger native warriors, especially for Tecumseh. Along with others, Tecumseh would bide his time over the next decade as he waited for his influence to rise and for the chiefs who did sign the Treaty of Greenville influence to fall. Along with his brother, he would prove to be the spark for the next round of Native versus American violence to explode in the Northwest Territory. But that is another story. Well, thank you once again, Chris, for writing that two-parter for us. If, like Chris, you would like to write a script for us, just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org, and suggest your idea. We'd love to hear from you. And again, if you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, you can find the details at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Thanks again to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Christopher Waters, read by Nick Barker.